Hello and welcome to the weekly newscast by First Ukraine. We are ready to present you all important news for outgoing week. My name is Victoria Zabiyan. Thank you for joining us. Minister of Economic Development and Trade Aivaras Abramovičius handed in resignation, but neither President and Prime Minister nor representatives of international community let him go. According to Minister, the reason of such decision is actions of first deputy head of pro-presidential parliament faction, how the situation is going to be resolved, and what are the international reaction on splitting President's team. Watch in the following story.
Minister of Economic Development and Trade of Ukraine, Aivaras Abramovičius, handed in resignation. He reported about absence of support and active resistance to reforms that were provided by his team. Mr. Abramovičius claimed that he does not want to be an umbrella for corruption. He accused deputy head of Petro Poroshenko's bloc faction Igor Kononenko and tries to appoint his people in ministry and enterprises to control money streams.
Но у меня и моей команды нет желания быть ширмой.
Neither me nor my team have any desire to serve as a cover-up for the covered corruption or become puppets for those who, very much like the old government, are trying to exercise control over the flow of public funds. I'm not willing to travel to Davos and talk about our successes to international investors and partners, all the while knowing that certain individuals are scheming to pursue their own interests behind my back. These people have names. Particularly, I would like to name one today. The name is Igor Kononenko. Despite representing the political party that had nominated me for my post, lately he has bent on obstructing our efforts. In his turn, Igor Kononenko has commented accusations of Aivaras Abramovičius. He said that minister is trying to unload responsibility for failures in ministry's work. Maybe in such a way some ministers try to shuffle off the responsibility from their personal work and work of their teams in ministries upon the deputies. By the way, in Parliament, a resolution on Abramovičius' resignation was registered. Igor Kononenko handed and registered the appeal in the National Anti-Corruption Bureau concerning public accusations towards him from the side of Aivaras Abramovičius. First deputy head of Petro Poroshenko's bloc claimed about relieving from the duties on time of investigation. On 8th of February, Mr. Abramovičius will visit the National Anti-Corruption Bureau as eyewitness on case of public accusations of Mr. Kononenko. Meanwhile, neither Ukrainian president nor prime minister support the idea of Minister of Economic Development to leave his position. Prime Minister of Ukraine Arseniy Yatsenyuk said that all ministers who work in current government do everything to provide progressive reforms and that it is not time to stop this process. I appreciate the position of all people who were forced to hand in resignation, even under political pressure. But I am assured that we have already done too much. And in this situation, this handing in resignation means to leave the battlefield.
І в цій ситуації відставка – це тікати з поля бою.
In his turn, President Petro Poroshenko also thinks that Aivaras Abramovičius has to stay to work in government. He said about this after his personal meeting with minister. President also recalled that he invited Mr. Abramovičius to the team by himself and gave him Ukrainian citizenship and asked presidential faction to nominate him to position of economy minister. Concerning resignation of Aivaras Abramovičius, Petro Poroshenko had a meeting with G7 ambassadors. They discussed situation with reforms in Ukraine and government and paid attention to financial support to Ukraine from the side of international community. Ambassadors of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Lithuania, Switzerland, Sweden and Great Britain in Ukraine also reported about their disappointment concerning decision of Aivaras Abramovičius to leave his position. Moreover, International Monetary Fund is deeply concerned with statement of Minister of Economy of Ukraine about his resignation. It was reported by Christine Lagarde. She underlined efforts of Mr. Abramovičius on way to reforms in Ukrainian government.
Today we have a guest in our studio with whom we are going to discuss Ukrainian political life in international context. He is Bogdan Yaremenko, international expert. Nice to meet you here.
Nice to meet you too.
And how decision of Mr. Abramovičius will influence the international community and the attitude of international community to Ukrainian political establishment, and whether we lost the support of Western partners?
Well, I believe it will depend on the next steps that will be undertaken by Ukrainian state. Unfortunately, there is no news about the level of Ukrainian corruption, which I believe already reached the level of the state capture. And here we will not lose any image, because Ukraine has no image in this field already. The worst that can happen is that the president or prime minister or Ukrainian politicians will try to make an impression that nothing really has happened, that it's kind of minor misunderstanding between minister and some other politician. So we really need this scandal, I mean Ukraine, because this scandal provides, let's say, the newly established Anti-Corruption Prosecutors Bureau with a chance to prove its adherence to law, its readiness to serve the community and the country by providing the transparent investigation of the corruption claims that was raised by Minister Abramovich. So this is, I would rather consider this a good chance for Ukraine to clear up ourselves of those accusations of corruption and to start a process of fighting this terrible situation. In the meantime, again, I don't see the situation as dangerous from the point of view of some immediate reaction from the point of view of IMF or other international partners, but the situation is important. Again, I'm repeating, from the point of view of the next or forthcoming steps of Ukrainian political elite and prosecutors bureau.
It was said that the international community is deeply concerned with the situation and how it seems to them this split in the presidential team.
Well, again, this is not the situation between, or the fights between Ukrainian politicians. It's not really something which could impress anyone in the world. What can impress is the readiness or ability of the president and other Ukrainian politicians to react and to
overcome the situation.
Yes, but I mean to react in the legal, from the point of view of the law. So to appoint the prosecutor and to allow him to conduct the investigation freely, independently, and transparently.
We go to another events in our political life, and the European Union will continue sanctions against Russian Federation because for now it does not execute Minsk agreements. It was said by Chancellor of Germany Angela Merkel during her briefing with President of Ukraine Petro Poroshenko in Berlin. According to her, sides will continue negotiations in Norman format in order to keep previously discussed responsibilities. Also, leaders of states talk about free visa regime. Angela Merkel supported President of Ukraine concerning necessity of the rest-free visa regime law adoption by Ukrainian Parliament. Economic support for Ukraine also was one of the topics for discussion. It was said that Ukraine will get financial aid further.
The ceasefire cannot be partial. It is there or not. And I regret to state that so far it is not. And people still die on the front line, both military and civilian. Russia and the militants are evidently not interested in peace and stability in Donbass. For Russia, the conflict in Donbass is an instrumental to keep destabilizing Ukraine. Lastly, it is obvious that sanctions against Russia must stay in place till Russia and its proxy fully implement Minsk agreement and Russia gets out of Donbass.
Minsk ist jetzt vor fast einem Jahr abgeschlossen worden.
Minsk agreements were signed more than 1 year ago, and we have to say that unfortunately, as it was earlier, we cannot see stable ceasefire. And this is the main condition for resolution of the conflict. We can observe that reduce of military action activeness, and it is good that we have found common points concerning Minsk agreements, but still we have not found political consensus. We also discussed support for Ukraine in economic sphere. According to action plan by Bundestag, in 2015, Germany allocated 700 million euros to Ukraine. This year, we want to continue this aid.
Also, near 200 Canadian soldiers continue to train soldiers of Ukrainian armed forces. The main goal of these trainings to adopt Ukrainian standards to NATO's ones. Experts from Canada also help to provide law enforcement reform in Ukraine. Prime Minister of Ukraine Arseniy Yatsenyuk discussed the situation of cooperation with Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada Stefan Dion. Their meeting took place in Kiev on 1st of February. Also, government officials talked about international sanctions against Russian Federation.
Now, Russia has begun a big game in order to lift sanctions.
І мета Росії – це
The goal of Russia is to assure the part of Western world in necessity of sanctions cancellation, and in fact it began the game under the title "Who involved on Minsk violations."
розпочати гру, хто винен в
Ukraine executes its part of Minsk agreement successively and clearly.
Україна послідовно і чітко виконала і виконує свою частину угоди.
But nothing was done from Russian side.
Не зроблено нічого. Саме тому вважаю, що будь-які дискусії
That is why I think that any discussions concerning possibility of sanctions cancellation have no any reason for now.
Не мають під собою на даному етапі жодних підстав.
Canada's support for Ukraine is unwavering, and Canada does not accept Russia's intervention and invasion of Ukraine. We do not accept what happened to Crimea.
So we can see that Ukrainian officials have a lot of meetings with our Western partners, and results of them are very positive. But there are also a lot of talks about cancellation of sanctions against Russia. How can you comment such kind of situation?
Oh yes, it's a quite a strange situation, and I believe it was a mistake of not just Ukrainian diplomacy, but also diplomacies of France and Germany when we allowed to link this international sanctions against Russia with the Minsk Accords, because basically those sanctions were introduced against Russia not as the part of the Minsk negotiation process, but as the result of the Russian intervention and military aggression against Ukraine. So, from my point of view, the process of lifting the sanctions or the cancellation of sanctions should be directly linked not to the implementation of the Minsk agreements or accords, but to the process of Russian withdrawal from the territory of Ukraine. And by this, I mean not just Donbass, but also Crimean Peninsula, which is surprisingly not in the package for negotiation, because again, the territorial integrity is the principle which is very important from the point of view of the international legal system or law system, and of course we should try to protect all the territories of Ukraine, and we should not be concentrated just on Donbass. So Crimea should become a part of the arrangements along with the Donbass, and then probably should the international sanctions would be directly linked to the process of Russian withdrawal from Donbass and Crimean Peninsula, then it will make some sense to Ukraine to find a compromise and to implement some changes in the Ukrainian legislation, maybe even to amend the constitution. So far, it sounds, at least to me, as a very strange and unproductive approach to try to lift or to discuss the cancellation of sanctions in the context of the implementation of the Minsk agreement.
But in your point of view, there is a possibility to renew relations by West with the Russian Federation in the nearest future?
Well, it looks like that it is a kind of approach.
But why? What is their interest in this case?
Of course, we're talking about the trade and the importance of the dialogue with Russia in the different spheres. I don't think that it is a productive approach because if someone is violating principles and general principles, you cannot trust basically this country or this person in anything. And it is exactly the way with President Putin. So if he's violating the principle of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukrainian country in Crimea and in Donbass, I doubt that it would be possible to cooperate with him in Afghanistan, in Syria, or wherever it is. Nevertheless, I believe under the pressure of internal business circles, maybe some political circles, especially those who are quite close to Russia, so we see the process of discussion when and how the sanctions would be lifted without the discussion on the nature of Russian aggression and the role of Russia in Ukraine. So I believe it is clearly the needs of the business, of the money, but not, I believe, the way to protect and to stand for principles.
You mentioned Crimea in your answer, and the next news actually about our peninsula that's annexed by Russia. Meanwhile, on 1st of February 2016, European Parliament adopted the resolution on the occupation of Crimea. The Parliament condemns the unprecedented level of human rights violation committed against Crimean Tatars on the peninsula annexed by Russia. MEPs have proposed to return the format Geneva Plus concerning the issues of the occupation of the Crimea and not to separate the question of the occupied peninsula from Donbass issues.
Paragraph 7, those in favour.
President Putin, you keep lying to the whole world. As a chief commander of your little, polite and green man, you bear your personal responsibility for those who disappeared or were murdered since 2014 in Crimea. Let me read the following names of Crimean Tatars who lost their lives. Reshat Ametov, Timur Shaymardanov, Seyran Zinedinov, Islam Jiparov, Jevdet Islamov, Eskander Absalamov, Ruslan Ganiyev, Arlen Terechov. The list is not complete. Colleagues, let's not repeat the mistakes of the 20th century. Let's call things the right names. Thank you.
European Union must continue its policy of non-recognition of annexation and keep the related sanctions against Russia. If Russian authorities want to improve their relations with the European Union, they should withdraw from Crimea and allow Ukraine to re-establish control over its territory. It is vital that the international organizations, human rights NGOs and media have unimpeded access to Crimea and that their presence is coordinated with the Ukrainian authorities. Therefore, I welcome the mission of the Special Representative for Human Rights of the Secretary-General of the Council of Europe. Also, I support the proposed Geneva Plus format and believe that the question of Crimea's return to Ukraine and efforts to stop the conflict in the east, Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, should not be decoupled, because we know that the causes of these two problems are the same.
And more details about the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe mission to Peninsula and its possible outcomes, watching the following story by Katerina Gladka.
In the end of January, a special mission of the Council of Europe, headed by the Special Representative of Secretary-General Gerald Studman, visited Crimea. The main goal of the mission is monitoring of the situation with human rights on Peninsula. At the 13th of January in Simferopol, the representative of the mission met with members of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatars, including the chairman of Mejlis, Rifat Chubarov. Separately, Mr. Studman had a meeting with Deputy Chairman of Mejlis Akhtem Chigos, which is kept under the arrest in the case of so-called 26th of February. Lawyer of Akhtem Mykola Polozov said the occupation authorities accused him of organizing mass riots. It is Article 212 of the Criminal Code of Russian Federation. Akhtem Chigos can receive from 4 to 10 years in prison.
Before the mission, before they were going to Crimea, the mission itself, for sure they came to Kiev and they had a number of meetings with all the stakeholders, both with the representative of state agencies here in Ukraine, but also with the representative of Mejlis and also of the representatives of civil society. The main idea is to provide their findings to the members of Council of Europe and then afterwards to decide or to discuss what the next actions by Council of Europe. So right now it's quite questionable whether this report would be public or not, and this could be a part of diplomatic relations.
It is to be recalled that 8 of 21 Ukrainian hostages of the Kremlin are legally detained in Crimea. 3 of them in the case of protests during referendum made by Russia: Akhtem Chigos, Mustafa Degemirci, Ali Asanov. While the mission was on Peninsula, there were mass searches of Crimean Tatars' families in Leninsk district, in Jankoy district and in Simferopol. There is no any statement from the side of Russian authority in Crimea about this situation.
There a genocide occurs. There accumulation comes. There occurs pressure and this Federal Security Service machine, which is breaking bones, especially of Crimean Tatars.
Mejlis of the Crimean Tatars, as well as human rights organization, has repeatedly stated that after the annexation of Crimea by Russia, repressions of the Crimean Tatars on the peninsula are held, but Russian authorities contradict this. In March, a mission of the Council of Europe will prepare a monitoring report about the situation with human rights on peninsula.
Well, it was said that Ukrainian authorities are going to discuss Crimean question in Geneva Plus format. But some experts said that it should stay in within the Minsk process. What is your point of view concerning this question?
I would rather recommend to make an attempt to keep it within the existing negotiating formats. And why? The new format, I see no instrument that would make, let's say, us possible to push Russia to join the new negotiating format on the issue of Crimean occupation. There are no reasons for Russia to join it, as it consistently says that the Crimean issue is closed for discussion, that there is nothing to close. Nothing to discuss, I'm sorry. Although within the existing formats we could add this issue of the occupation or deoccupation to the agenda of the existing Normandy format or Minsk format, and probably it would be the international community will find more possibilities to make Russia negotiating or discussing this issue. And of course, it is very premature to declare that the new format will make any discussion regarding the deoccupation possible. I believe we should go step by step, like mission that we saw being arranged by the Council of Europe. So first of all, we need to make Russia discussing the occupation issues, the issues related to occupation, especially the human rights violation. So, and then closely, step by step, we will open the whole issue, the whole spectrum of issues related to occupation, and hopefully later on the negotiation might be transferred in something like negotiation over the deoccupation. So step by step, we need to go.
You suggest to discuss this question apart for all negotiation processes, because we know that Minsk agreements are not executed. So,
well, but the negotiating format is existing. So, and the leaders of the countries are meeting in the Normandy format. The ministers of foreign affairs are meeting oftenly. So it will be much more easier to request or to demand some issues related to Crimea to be discussed within those formats. Of course, it would be much more difficult to add additional item to the Minsk accords or agreements. Nevertheless, we should try to begin the process just from initiating the discussion over the issue, because again, Russia is stating that the issue is closed. We need to reopen the issue. We can do it just by trying to reopen it, by discussing the issues that Russia basically cannot Russia must agree to discuss the human rights violation or the human rights situation, because it's not been considered as the internal issue anymore.
But it is known that they are refused from the Convention of Human Rights of European Union.
Well, anyway, they still the member. Russia is still a member of their Council of Europe, so they still obliged, and also the member of UN. And UN Charter is also provides on the universal character of the human rights. So there are much more than just their obligations within the Council of Europe or some Council of Europe conventions. And I believe it's a good time right now to try to push Russia to start the discussions over some issues related to occupation, like the process of the changing the citizenship of Ukrainian citizens into Russian one, the human rights violation in regard of the Crimean Tatars, Ukrainian activists, the rights of the different religious groups, so on, so on, so on.
We have one more important question to discuss, the detention of Nadia Savchenko, because the last week the new facts in this case have appeared. So, one of Nadia Savchenko's kidnappers, Pavel Karpov, assistant of Russian president's advisor Vladislav Surkov, detained Ukrainian told about that during her last evidence in the court, which took place in Rostov-on-Don. She said that Mr. Karpov was a driver of the car by which Savchenko was transferred to Russia. The court added photos of Mr. Karpov to the case. More details about case of Ukrainian pilot, watch in our following story.
Yes, this person.
I ask the court to pay attention to this photo. This person's name is Pavel Karpov. He is well known for you. In LPR he was designated as coordinator of presidential administration.
On the 1st of February, Nadia Savchenko began to give last evidence on her case, which included loud statement about involvement of Russian politician Pavel Karpov into her kidnapping. On his turn, according to Russian online media Kommersant, Mr. Karpov answered.
I saw her on TV 4,000 times, but never in real life. Unfortunately or fortunately, so her statement is either a mistake or a lie. Or maybe it is an intentional effort to disorient the court. It is difficult for me to say what I did on that day, on 23rd of June. but I feel that I was not in Luhansk at that time.
The defense team of Ukrainian pilot has revealed phone conversation with alleged participation of political consultant Karpov with Luhansk terrorist Valery Bolotov. On this record, the nationality of woman pilot of the helicopter is discussed, who earlier fought in Iraq. Nevertheless, the court refused to interrogate both of them.
Today we found out the main thing, the last for me. The representatives of presidential administration of Russia acted toward Nadia Savchenko's detention. It is not important that they are former representatives of Kremlin. In common, it is Surkov's circle of President Putin advisor for Donbass and Ukrainian issues, who took part in Savchenko's kidnapping.
Given that it is prohibited for Savchenko to use maps in the detention center, she instead painted the map with the place of her detention by herself. These pictures were added to the case. Innocence evidences, which were provided by the defense, were denied by court. In particular, materials on involvement of Lugansk terrorist leader Igor Plotnitsky and Colonel of Federal Security Service Sergei Pochichuev were not added to the case. Also, Russian court refused to take into account evidences of mobile connection expert. His data proved that due to the absence of mobile net on the territory where Savchenko was, she couldn't be a centerer. Advocates also gave evidences that Ukrainian pilots could not reach the tower physically, from where, according to the side of accusation, Savchenko directed the fire upon journalists.
Decision which will be made by Donetsk court is transmitted from the top, from the presidential administration, in fact from those people who kidnapped Savchenko. It is why the only one possibility to save her, aside from the sentence and from the heaviness of the sentence from 20 to 25 years of imprisonment, is political negotiations with Russian high-level officials.
Pro-Russian terrorists detained Nadia Savchenko in June 2014. On this video we can see how they interrogated Savchenko.
What is your idea?
I gave the oath to people to defend Ukraine and its territorial integrity.
Defend people from whom?
To defend from the external invasion.
Invasion from where?
From Russia.
You think that here is Russia?
I heard you say that you are from St. Petersburg.
Nadia Savchenko fought as a volunteer on the east of Ukraine. She was detained in Luhansk region and transferred to Russia. There she is kept in detention center. The captive is accused of murder of Russian journalists and illegal crossing of the Russian border. Ukrainian pilot denies all accusations. She gave her first evidences on 22nd of September 2015.
One more time I claimed that I was kidnapped from Ukraine and transferred to Russia by force. I claimed that the investigation departments of the investigation committee who are charging me now were involved into my kidnapping. That I did not see where those journalists were, and I never knew those journalists.
As a mark of protest towards her detention, Nadia Savchenko announced the third hunger strike. Since 7th of December 2015, she has lost more than 18 kilos. In case of judgment of conviction by the court, Nadia told that she would fall back on severe dry hunger strike.
So, what will be your short forecast concerning the detention of Nadia Savchenko? Because right now we see that so high figures were mentioned in this case, and it is obviously that it is not just a court procedure.
Well, of course, it is the political show, and basically the script has been written by someone in Kremlin. And no matter what kind of evidence the defense team and Madame Savchenko will present in the court, it will not change the final conclusions or the decision of court. And she will be sentenced, and of course the court will deny, will ignore the evidences of life, even the principles of law. Nevertheless, it is very important what has been done by Madame Savchenko and her defense team, because sooner or later we will bring to the justice all those who basically ordered the Russian invasion in Ukraine, who arranged it, who organized it, and those who committed terrible crimes against international law, human rights, so on, so on, so on. And more we know about those people involved, better it is for the future justice, which would be served at some point.
So this detention is still have an international scale, and international community will consider this part when they will, when they will find the resolution of this Russian aggression.
Well, again, this case has nothing to do with the law. And from the legal point of view, the international community expects, and Ukrainians, and even Madame Savchenko expects nothing from this court. We need it to be finished just to receive the sentence and to start the negotiation and to start the discussion over the possible format how Madame Savchenko could be returned back to Ukraine. But again, what's been said by her and by her lawyers, or the evidence presented, it's important, because sooner or later, those evidences will be used in another court case against the Russian leadership and Russian military who violated international law and human rights in Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much for your visit, for fruitful discussion. It was nice to meet you here.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you.
One of the most urgent topics for Ukraine stays war on the east. What happened there for the last week and how Ukrainian soldiers managed to resist aggressor? Watch in the following story.
Despite a truce in the area of anti-terrorist operation, military clashes between Ukrainian military and Russian terrorists do not stop. Every day occur a few dozens of attacks with machine guns, grenade launchers and mortars. According to the current data, to the so-called Luhansk People's Republic arrived Russian curators and a group of officers of the Russian General Staff to test the system of operational and combat training of illegal armed groups. To demonstrate the military training of Russian fighters, they fired upon Ukrainian positions in Tryokhizbenka with grenade launchers and mortars. Moreover, this week Zaitsevo village undergone several mortar firings. Village resident told how she survived by miracle.
In the evening, we heard screams of the mines, ran to the basement and heard massive explosion. It was heard how the windows fell down and the whole building was shaking. It starts every evening and every night the shellings took place.
In Zaitsevo village, the crossing checkpoint is located. Due to systematic firing, traffic through it was closed in order to prevent possible tragedies. One of such tragic events took place last year on January 13, when Russian terrorists fired with rocket missiles the checkpoint near Volnovakha. After the shelling, 13 bus passengers died. All of them were civilians.
Ukraine is in the second place in Europe in terms of spread of cancer. Each year, cancer kills about 80 million people. 35% of them are of working age. Every day in Ukraine, 250 people develop cancer, 250 of who die. World Statistics provides information of cancer mortality rates. Near 6 million people in 2016, meaning every 8th person dies from cancer. Ukrainian scientists have identified the unique vaccines. The goals of cancer vaccination are to activate the expand tumor-specific T cells as the effective means of augmenting immunity.
The number of cancer patients in Ukraine exceeds 1 million people, and 70 to 80% of them need to undergo radiotherapy. Every fourth male and every fifth female in Ukraine face increased cancer risks. This is a very large share of patients.
Doctors diagnosed Nicholas Severchuk lung cancer a month ago. He was brought from the Dnipropetrovsk region to the Kiev Oncology Center. Revived tumor in the lungs, but now treatment is assigned. I think I get well. The doctor-oncologist Olga Ponomaryova said the result of clinical trials of cancer vaccines provide effective in the treatment of breast cancer. However, she recognized the last stages doctors resort to chemotherapeutic. Chemotherapeutic is more extensive spectrum and it's used in the most of malignant tumors. Chemotherapy toxicity occurs, people are aware of it. 65-year-old Larisa Koshechkina says after they are diagnosed with a breast cancer, she underwent a course of chemotherapy after doctors removed a malignant tumor. After the operation, the woman agreed cancer vaccine clinical trials. After removal of the breast, I came here and started taking auto vaccine. Now I feel well. I consider myself totally healthy. An adjuvant is an ingredient of a vaccine that helps create a strong immune response in the patient's body. This unique cancer vaccine, invented in this biotech center, its two-component composition, tumor patient's own cells and product of microbial synthesis, called enhanced defenses. For example, the cost of 6 months course of treatment similar to Cuban vaccine over 10,000 euro, Ukrainian counterpart 8,000 hryvnia. One of the inventors, Professor Grigory Potebnya, said vaccine is prepared individually for each patient. With the help of our auto-vaccine, more than 5,000 patients are treated. If it's stomach cancer, use of auto-vaccine improves 5-year survival rate of 30% of patients with breast cancer, by 17% of patients with lung cancer, by 37%. Vaccinotherapy has no side effects and it's not toxic, academician Vasily Chihun says. However, there are not auto-vaccine standardization procedures at the Ministry of Health.
The development of strategy of combination immunotherapy with cytotoxic and molecular targets against for future multimodal cancer therapy will eventually great progress and ultimately lead in important outcomes for patients received cancer immunotherapy.
Chief oncologist of the Health Ministry Valery Chishuk said that the scientist must submit all necessary documents to standardized vaccine in State Expert Center. This may take several years in the Ministry of Health. Working group should consider this question. The vaccine is registered in some localities and all these materials go to the State Expert Center. It can take in average 3 years. The mechanism of therapeutic action of this vaccine is following: stimulation the activity of mechanism of anti-tumor immunity. It increases the activation of natural killer cell specific T lymphocytes. The use of this vaccine in the post-operative period reduces the availability of the remaining tumor cells, thereby prevents the development of metastases and recurrence.
Ukrainian fashion days have started in Kyiv. Designers and clothes producers from all the country presented their work to public. Our journalist Anna Bilyeva saw the event. Details watching the following story.
Designers and clothes producers from all Ukraine have come here. What is the new trends of fashion industry and what to wear this season? We will find the answer just right now.
30th anniversary fashion festival has gathered more than 500 fashion brands. Participants could establish partner relations, exchange with experience and have a look at last collections of young designers. According to experts, the state of textile, clothing and footwear industry in Ukraine is supportable. Investment in light industry has greatly increased. Technologies are developed, new requirements, new materials, new models. In common, the development is present. Following the result of the previous year, we have 43% of production export. Essentially, we export to Europe. Opportunities are great, we just need a big initiative. We have possibilities. Our designers are very high demanded. Clothing from Ukrainian manufacturers are in high priority. As for the last 2 years, prices on Ukrainian clothes have risen only by 27%, which is much less from foreign colleagues. Besides from that, on enterprises, strict control systems are operating, which gives preferences for the quality of goods on market. The use of natural fabrics is one of the advantages of Ukrainian designers. The key feature of Kyiv Fashion Days is an ability for every visitor to get to know better with latest collections of designers' clothing, to try on fancy things and by touch assure oneself of truly European quality of goods. Apart from stylish dressing for adults, artists have also paid attention for children's fashion. So business styles for kids was presented at section of modern and stylish school uniform by a number of Ukrainian makers. Among its special features are the use of natural materials exceptionally, practicability as well as elegance. Thanks to the evening gown collection from Tetiana Vasina, every little girl might feel oneself as a princess. The collection is purely made of genuine fabrics. There was used lots of handicraft, including beading. It has dressy and holiday look, and kids just love it. Many of fashion experts attended the event. One of them was Olga Kalashnikova, fashion expert and manager of representative office of Parisian Institute Mode Art International in Russia. Ukrainian designers are freer, more creative and work easier with interpretations. This exhibition presents several designers with modern, very relevant, competent interpretations of folk style. Modern clothing using folk motifs, embroidery, is increasingly gaining popularity in Ukraine as well as abroad. That is why at the festival were presented outwear, dresses and shirts with national elements. However, special attention of visitors attracted by the collection of genuine vyshyvankas, Ukrainian national clothes. In the wardrobe of everyone must be vyshyvanka. It is on trend, very nice, and each embroidery is a talisman for any person, whether he is Ukrainian or not. People are tired of the grey, tired of the brown and black. So this year only bright colors are fashionable. It is all shades of turquoise, coral, bright blue, red and yellow, and of course the traditional white and beige. Kyiv Fashion Days show that Ukrainian designers are constantly hardworking and upgrading despite the unstable situation in the country.
It was Weekly Newscast by First Ukraine. See you in 1 week. Goodbye.